Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, November 11th, 2025, and our friends Ray McGovern and Graham Fuller are back with us. Welcome back.
Thanks.
Thank you, Nima.
Please subscribe and hit like button, helping us reaching more people. And let me start, Ray, with you and with what is going on in Ukraine. As we talk, it seems that Pokrovsk is falling, and the situation, and Russia is advancing on Ukrainian soil. And how do you see the battlefield and what's going on the battlefield? Is it going to help the Trump's position?
Is it going to help?
The Trump's position, make Trump's position even better to negotiate, to talk with the Russian president?
No, the war is pretty much over in terms of the Russian army defeating the Ukrainian army. They have cauldrons around specific areas. 2 Sundays ago, Putin himself appeared in fatigues for an ostensible briefing from the chief of the general staff. And what he was told was, we've got two cauldrons going, 10,500 Ukrainian soldiers caught in these cauldrons. And the first thing Putin says, well, now look, don't kill them all. We want to take them as POWs. Okay, so make that clear. If they'll surrender, that would be really good for them, because otherwise, otherwise they're surrounded. Okay. And by the way, you wanted to brief me on this new weapon, Chief of Staff. Would you tell me about this Burovyesnik? What is it? So he gets the 9 yards about this nuclear propelled, nuclear powered cruise missile can stay up for almost forever, and can have a range. Well, how far did that fly, General? Oh, 14,500 kilometers. And could it fly? Yeah. How long was it up there? Oh, 14 hours. Yeah. So, in other words, here's Putin saying, look, West, look, Trump, we got this one. Okay. Now, we're willing to go pretty far, and we're also willing to make sure that that we have this nuclear deterrent that you won't believe until you see it. And to ensure that you could see it, we told your intelligence people before we tested it.
Okay.
So please believe this, okay? So I think Putin is sitting high, but he's still worried as hell that people like Hegseth or Rubio or Kellogg, that they have the president's ear. And that makes the president unpredictable, which is the worst kind of thing in an American president that the Russians have always been afraid of. And so they're on tenterhooks. And the big thing, and I'll end with this, is their proposal, which is 7 weeks old now, made on the 22nd of September. Look, New START is over. It expires on February 5th, but we're willing to keep the quantitative limits on your offensive missiles, whether they're ICBMs or sea-launched ballistic missiles or bombers. We'll keep them at 1,550 if you do. And we could do that for a whole year, and maybe we can sort this thing out. What do you think? And 2 weeks ago, Trump says, in answer to a question from the press, he said, well, sounds like a good idea to me. But Lavrov and Putin are saying, we'd really like something more official. What are you going to? So, in my view, this is the litmus test. If Trump can't do this very sensible thing that requires no extra care, just keep the limits on for another year. If he can't do that, I think Putin is going to have to conclude that, man, this guy may want to do this, but if he does want to do it, and he's not just pulling our leg, he's not his own man. He's got to listen to Rubio and Tex.
Yeah.
So what does that leave the Russians with? Well, the Russians inexorably will win the war in Ukraine. They want a bigger settlement, but they're willing to wait. Hello, they have 3 more years of Trump. Maybe he'll change his mind again. I think that they have a relaxed posture, except for this notion that these crazies might might persuade Trump to do something really crazy.
Ray, I'd be interested. You've rubbed shoulders and elbows with the great so-called in Washington over the years. How do you interpret why do you think Trump has surrounded himself by many of these know nothings, no background, strict ideologues, contribute almost nothing? What is the source of their influence? Is it the so-called military industrial complex? I find that I'm still baffled by why Trump would listen to these guys who are obviously wrong.
Well, so am I baffled. I won't pretend to be otherwise. So what do? I ascribe it to delusional narcissism. I mean, he apparently believes that he can do this. He can do this all by himself. If he has to keep a couple of neocons like Rubio on, and has to keep Kellogg with his portfolio, he can do that. Every now and then he'll flip them something to eat. But no, I'm in control. I can do all this stuff myself. Now,
Maybe.
militating against that is his zigzags, his roller coaster approach. Okay, let's have a summit. No, let's not have a summit. So Lavrov and Putin are saying, look, he's circumscribed. He really can't do everything he wants to do because he has to answer Russophobia in Washington and in Europe. So that's the only conclusion they can draw if they want to give him the benefit of the doubt. But
Yeah.
that's good enough. That's my guess, and it's
Yeah,
really just
I share your. I'm not entirely happy with that explanation, but it's what we've got there right now. It seems to me, though, that certainly the battlefield is extraordinarily important, all important in this. But in the end, somebody has got to work out the politics that is going to save face for Trump. And that's tricky. To hell with Zelensky. I don't think Zelensky matters. I mean, maybe he's a brave guy. Maybe he's rallied his nation. That's fine, but I don't think anybody owes much to Zelensky. But Trump has to save face in some way, and I don't know what that device will be. Maybe some of these Russian conquests are designed to be, pawn. What's the word? Trading pieces on the board.
yeah. I guess the only thing we know for sure is what happened in Alaska. And that's become clearer with Lavrov talking about what Trump allegedly promised with respect to restraining Zelensky. In other words, Trump gave way. Trump said, all right, I won't keep pressing for immediate ceasefire. You guys don't want that? All right, I give up. We're not going to do that anymore. We'll go for the whole enchilada, a peace deal that includes recognizing your core interests. The
Yeah,
other thing was Trump saying, and this was clear from the readout, such as it was, Trump saying, okay, now I'm going to deal with Zelensky. I'm going to prevent him from putting the kibosh on this whole thing. And the Europeans, they don't matter. I'm going to have them in the White House. I give them the script here and say, look, no more aid from us to Ukraine. You're welcome to do that yourself, and we'll take care of this. Now, Trump didn't do that.
he did not do that. That's right.
Yeah, so he reversed himself to the point where this Budapest summit that Trump proposed, all of a sudden he said, "Well, no, we're not ready. We better not have that." So the Russians are sitting back saying, "What the hell is going on here?" And they're being overly sugary, if you can use that expression. They're saying, "Well, he has his real problems. Budapest is not canceled; it's still possible." And we'll send Dmitriev to talk about economic progress in that tunnel under the Bering Strait. So there's sort of conflictual streams in the Russian leadership as well, with Medvedev saying, no, we're in a war. Yeah, we can't deal with this guy anymore. And Medvedev and Lavrov saying, no, we're still trying to get the U.S. to say whether, in their view, in the U.S. view, those agreements at
Yeah,
Alaska still
yeah,
obtained. So
yeah.
You know what's going on? As time goes by, we see that we know that Donald Trump hates to play with a losing hand. That's why he's trying to do everything to put pressure on India, China, which didn't work. He's talking about Turkey, and it doesn't seem that Turkey gonna, gonna obey the Trump administration. But how about the invitation, the visit of Central Asian countries? Because he tries to do something in Central Asia together with what's going on in Syria. How do you find the whole picture when you bring all these players in? It seems to me that Trump is trying to do everything that may bring some sort of leverage on the Russian government, which, in my opinion, that would not happen. But what is your take on that?
Well, I think we have to remember that the Central Asian states, above all, their main focus is Moscow. That's who they have to live with. That's who they have to deal with. It's whom they've dealt with for several hundred years. So I don't. I would be very surprised to see much independent initiative on the part of any of the Central Asian states. It could be maybe if there's some sweetener that was involved in the whole thing. But I think Trump is, as you say, Nima, is casting around for potential allies who can help him out of this situation. And there are probably not very many countries that want to do it because it's not a very welcome task. It will be Washington will not be happy even if they make even if they saves Washington's face, they will. It's still an awkward situation. So I don't know where he's going to find anybody with real credibility, and I don't think Central Asia is the place to go for that at all.
Yeah. Ray, do you find that the situation, because the Syrian president went to Russia and talked with the Russian president, and it seems that the outcome of the meeting was somehow positive, as was reported by the Russian president and by the Russian officials. Then we've learned that Donald Trump, which was supposed to withdraw the forces, the soldiers from Syria, they have decided to put, to send more troops and to make a new base or occupy a new base close to Damascus. How do you see the play in Syria? How do you see the, because after all, I really believe that beside what's going on with the case of the West Asia, it's a playground for Russia and the United States to confront each other. How do you feel? How do you find that, Ray?
Well, Nima, first off, with respect to Putin, the visuals were lousy. Putin going up in his Jelani, about twice his size, and shaking hands with a known ISIS head chopper. I mean, I thought that was really unfortunate. Now, I'm a member of the realism school of international relations, okay? But I also have human tendencies. That was a little too much for me, all right? So I started thinking, why? Well, Putin is above everything a realist. He wants to develop good relations with whoever is running Syria now. I mean, the Russians have. I think they still have an air base there. Do they? Do they have still Latakia? I mean, that's
I don't know
big.
about an air. They certainly, I think, still have their naval base up in the Northwest.
Yeah. So there's a presence there. Realist school of people do what realism dictates, and that is if it's a head chopper, but he's in control of Syria. So you meet with him and you shake his hand, and you look at him and say, well, welcome to the real world. Now, as far as Trump is concerned, it was really bizarre. I think it was just yesterday where they went behind closed doors, no photograph, no video, nothing. The only thing we have is from the Syrians, and they have pictures of Jolani or whatever his name is changed to, and Trump. So Trump is trying to make sure that he does Israel's bidding. Israel is behind this whole thing with respect to Syria. Israel wants to have a decent relationship with Jolani, and the U.S. is a good place to broker that. Uh, the Israelis already taken over the Golan Heights with express permission from Trump. They've worked their way into Syria, farther west, and as long as the Turks don't come in real big, in my view, and Graham, you'll know more about this than I do. In my view, that as long as Giuliani has some support from the U.S. and the U.S. supports Israel, then Giuliani is happy to let Israel have its way up to a certain point. And that's at the core of all this stuff, just as it is at the core of all U.S. policy toward that area of the world.
Yeah, well, to the degree, I think, what is it, Jolani or Shara, I think is his name now, or whatever. But yeah, I mean, he wants to keep his seat. That's the number one goal of every single ruler up and down the Gulf, maybe outside the Gulf as well. But so I think there is no other power. Jolani or Shara would rather deal with Washington directly, I think, than with Bibi. God knows. But this guy, I mean, I guess Washington and Russia are kind of jockeying a little bit for position to see who can have some kind of voice in the new Syria and what the new Syria will be. But I think it's far from clear who this guy is, what he wants. He used to be a head chopper, as you say, extreme religious right winger. But, you can change if your job depends on that.
The other thing is that it seems to me, looking at the policies of Al Jolani, it seems that he's totally in the hand of the Turkish intelligence. Graham, you may, because he's trying to play both sides, as we see, because this is a tradition, Turkish tradition, to play all the sides and somehow find. And just like Zelensky, which I really believe that he plays in the hand of the MI6, and it seems that they have managed Al Jolani in Syria, and they're directing him in terms of going to Russia, going to Washington, and Turkey is not in a good position in Syria, Graham, because they thought that the fall of Assad regime would facilitate their ambitions in Syria. That is not happening.
Yes, that's true, Nima. I agree. On the other hand, I can't think of another state that matters more on Syria's border than Iran than Turkey. Iran, of course, in theory, will matter down the road, and Israel has great destructive power capabilities within Syria, but Turkey is not going to give up. This is really the heartland in many ways of the old Ottoman Empire, as you know. I think there will be quite a struggle for the heart and soul of who Syria belongs to. And Jolani is under pressure, among other things, to be a good Muslim and to be a good Arab. And so far, I don't know how he succeeded in this task.
Ray, here is, before going to the subject, to the topic of the West Asia and the conflict in West Asia, here is what we've learned from the Russian FSB. They're talking that they have prevented a Ukrainian British operation to hijack a Russian MiG-31 equipped with hypersonic Kinjal missile. And do you see any sort of restriction, any sort of limitation to what the British intelligence is doing? Because they're going too far. It can bring some sort of, they can, Russians are so patient, but I think somehow they're gonna reach the limits of their patience, and there's something big something big can happen in Ukraine, and I don't know who's going to be responsible for that if Russia decides to confront the British intelligence. So far, they haven't. They were just limited to, their operation was limited to Ukraine. But I don't know if Russia is considering to do some sort of intelligence operation in Europe. How do you see the escalation in Ukraine, Ray?
I see Mr. Putin as the driving force here. And I see him as cool, calm, and collected. He knows MI5 like the back of his hand. Okay. He knows that they encouraged the Ukrainians to invade Russia, for God's sake, to try to bomb or use drones against Russian bomber bases. And the real story, in my view, with respect to Putin's reaction was pinpricks. Oh, they got a couple of our bombers. Yeah, this was a strategic bomber base, but look, we're more concerned with blowing up railroad tracks over bridges, which is precisely how he reacted. So I'm not of the school that thinks that Putin is going to run out of patience. He's winning. His attrition tactics have proven very successful, sparing, by the way, many Russian soldiers' lives. He's got the high hand here. If he can deal with Trump eventually, and we're talking months now, in Putin's view, in my view, well, that'll be fine. If he can't deal with Trump, well, he could go a little farther, or he could set up a cordon sanitaire, which won't quit, which a defeated Ukrainian army will have to abide by. And if the Westerners come in then, well, then I think Putin might react, but only then. And I don't think the West Europeans or the Europeans in general are so stupid that they would put their own troops in Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, Ray, I'm sure you may share my thought on this as well. I think apart from the crazy adventurism of the Brits, I think continued possibility of truly dangerous false flag operations are out there. We've already seen it with these so-called Russian drones, which attacked 3 or 4 NATO states, including Poland, and they were all on television. Well, I think they were largely disqualified later on, and people said, no, they weren't really from Russia, and they were redirect, whatever the case was. But I think the case was dismissed largely, but not in public opinion. And so all everyone remembers now is, oh, just recently, the Russians were testing our defenses and performing dangerous acts around our borders. And that tends to be what people remember and what becomes history, if you will, of this whole thing. So I'd be quite terrified as to what the Brits would come up with for a false flag operation. Maybe the MiG striking, I don't know, Warsaw, or I have no idea. But I would not put anything past them, and they are especially past masters at false flag.
Exactly. And I'm hearkening back to my Irish grandfather now, who said, Raymond, do you know why the sun never sets on the British Empire? I said, sure, I know. Like, you don't know. I'll sit you down and I'll tell you. The sun never sets on the British Empire because the good Lord would never trust the British in the dark. Okay. Now, all right. It's just, I agree with you. A real false flag operation could change everything, but it have to be so major scale that chances are the Russian intelligence would anticipate it. And even then, Putin is going a tridding. Would he overreact? Well, his primary purpose is to prevent nuclear exchange. And he's been really too cautious by the standards of many, or by the opinions of many Russians. So I think, it's a blessing. I use the word advisedly, that he's so attentive to what Trump might end up being persuaded to do by the British or by anybody else, that he's super careful, and that the Russians have a high tolerance for this kind of false flag operation, as sinister and as explosive, literally, as it might be.
Yeah.
Graham, Donald Trump in his interview on 60 Minutes, he said that Russia and China have been testing nukes. That's why we're going to do that. And there is no evidence of that. And they have, as Ray has mentioned, they have, tested two uh, vehicles,
Vehicles.
and
Yeah.
yeah, to one Burevestnik and the other Poseidon. They are capable. Even Oreshnik is capable of carrying nuclear bombs, but they have not tested any nuke. And they're talking about. And today we've learned that Lavrov said if any nuclear power conducts nuclear weapons tests, Russia will do the same. Somehow we were talking about that the two administrations behind the scene are communicating to each other. But the latest comments on the part of the Russian president, he said that's a serious issue with this new rhetoric with the Trump administration and Donald Trump himself. It seems that the communication is not that much efficient, Graham.
Yeah, well, I'm not a military expert on these things. Ray knows a good bit more than I do about uh, the actual weapons involved. But I mean, we've Trump every week we hear some new outrageous proposal. You can say, well, that's because he's crazy, or he doesn't know what he's doing, or he's careless. Uh, or you can say this is all quite a calculated softening up campaign in which you keep the enemy off guard and you change the subject just when you get into a difficult position. And I'm not enough of a Trump expert myself to say which is the real Trump, or all of the above basically are the real Trump. So I don't know how seriously to take these latest suggestions or proposals that are outrageous to the Russians or outrageous to other people that Trump is making. I don't know what's in his head.
Well, I talked to Melania last night. Uh, I figured she might know what's in his head. I make a joke, of course. I too am baffled, but the proof here is in the pudding. It seems to me that Trump is woefully uninformed. Did he know about the Burevestnik? I mean, my God, the Russians told the U.S. military, "Hey, we're going to test this thing. Watch it. It's really pretty super. You want to be in on this from the beginning." Did they not tell Trump? Did they not tell him that it was the test of a missile and not a test of a nuclear warhead? Did they not tell him about the Poseidon, which fits on a submarine and can do real damage, but
I
it's
don't
not
know.
a nuclear test? Or even the Oreshnik, more than a year old now. Did that come as a complete surprise to Trump? I think we have to allow for the possibility that the answer is yes, yes, yes to all these things. So when he hears about the Burevestnik, for example, advertised by Putin himself, he's going to get back at him. He said, "Okay, you start that testing. We're going to begin nuclear testing too," not knowing what the hell he's talking about. This is not
Yeah,
a nuclear test.
yeah,
Now, the Russians are a little nonplussed because they've tried to get an explanation from the U.S. And Lavrov says, we try to find out what they mean by this, but we get no answer. So, in my view, it was an off-the-cuff sort of thing. It would take 3 years to prepare suitable testing in the US. And the Russians are saying, yeah, if you do it, we'll do it too. Let's instead abide by the quantitative restrictions on offensive missilery, which are contained in the New START Treaty,
yeah,
expires on February 5th. That will be, I
yeah.
guess I said this before, that will be the litmus test. If Trump can agree to that eminently sensible thing, I think then Putin will have to say, "Oh, maybe you other guys were right. Maybe we just can't trust the guy. Maybe he's not encumbered by the hawks and the Europeans. Maybe he's pulling our leg. Maybe we just have to face up to that." I
Well,
hope
go ahead, Ray. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I hope that's not the case. I hope that some kind of sanity will prevail, and that within the next, I think, about 12 weeks left before February 5th, Trump will find us. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It sounded like a good idea at the beginning. I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you officially, but yeah, we're in there. No more violations of the New START Treaty. until for another year. So I'm
Yeah.
hoping, but we'll have to see. And if he says something else, that will mean a lot to the Russians.
But Ray, I was commenting earlier that how it could be that Trump would surround himself by these not only hawks and neocons and Russian haters, but by incompetents and ignorant people in supposedly strategic positions. You are much closer and have been all along to the seats of power in Washington than I have been. Where do you see any voice? Well, let's say take somebody like Doug McGregor or anybody like that. Where do you see any voice of calm, some vision, realism that could ever talk to Trump at any point? I don't know all the players in Washington. There's got to be somebody out there. Obviously, as I said, Doug McGregor comes close to mind, and they know each other, and I think respect each other. But I did, where is any thoughtful advice coming from?
Well, Graham, it helps to be as old as I am because, like you, I served in various administrations. And during the first Reagan administration, 81 to 85, I had a catbird seat. I was briefing one on one Vice President Bush, Secretary of State Schultz, Secretary of Defense Weinberger, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Okay.
That's
Now,
not bad. Not a bad lineup.
yeah, it was also the national security advisor as well. So every other day, some combination of those would be seen by me personally, one on one, and the other people by my partner. Okay. So what did I observe? I observed a Reagan who was consumed with Russophobia. Okay. And then this fellow, Gorbachev, came in, and everyone was confused. And Casey and Gates, you know Casey well. I know Gates well. They said, don't be fooled. He's just a clever communist. Gorbachev, don't believe him. And Schultz and George H.W. Bush, the vice president, would say, Ray, this guy, how do you pronounce his name? Gorbachev. I said, it's really easy. Graham, you'll relate to this because you know Russian as well as I do. I said, look, Mr. Vice President, say garbage. Garbage.
Oh my God.
Now say off. Off. Now, say them both together and accent the off. Garbage off. That's it. You got it, Vice President. And he did. Reagan never got it. The others didn't get it. But I didn't explain the orthography for me. It didn't do it. So anyhow, Gorbachev comes in a more serious vein. The real analysts of Soviet affairs that I knew were working outside of Gates's purview. They were in something called the analysis group of the Foreign Broadcast Information Center. Okay. That meant that they could speak their mind based on what they saw, what the Russians were saying. I used to go to them regularly. They tell me the real scoop. And so I could tell Schultz, for example, here I'm waiting in Schultz's anteroom, and his secretary said, Mr. McGovern, look at this just came in. The Secretary of State invited to go to Moscow. Gorbachev has invited him. So, well, thank you very much. It was a ticker. You have to realize that back in you had ticker machines, AP, Reuters. So she'll pull up the ticker, and I go in to see Secretary Schultz, and I said, have they told you? And he said, no, you've been invited to see, go to Moscow. And he looks at me, he smiles, a weird smile, and he says, I suppose your superiors would say that's a lousy idea. So McGovern rises to the occasion, and he goes, Mr. Secretary, you know that I often disagree with my superiors when it comes to Soviet foreign policy, and I've got a little background in that. And he says, oh, that's right. Okay, good. Okay. Now, those little subtle things coming not only from me, but from George H.W. Bush, who was awful briefing, and from this wonderful chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a real brown boot soldier commissioned on the battlefield in World War II, they all realized that, look, if we could deal with this guy, let's try it. Now, I stopped briefing and stopped the briefing machine there in 1985. Before you knew it, Gorbachev was not only suggesting other things, but reducing, or actually not reducing, destroying a whole class of intermediate and lower range ballistic missiles in Europe. And I, I thought, oh my God, that'll never fly. Well, it flew, for God's sake. By that time, Reagan was willing to trust, but verify. We could verify it. And my friend Scott Rutter was the first one on the ground out there to got off a place called Votkinsk for 2.5 years, watching them chop up these SS-20. So suffice it to say, there are always divisions in a ruling class there, or the White House or the State Department of Defense and Joint Chiefs of Staff. But this is really out of hand, because this time, where is George Shultz? My God, it's Rubio. Where is Weinberger? Now, Weinberger was just as bad as Hegseth, for God's sake. So that cancels each other out. But Trump doesn't seem to have any sensible advisors. Now, he may stop before he invades Venezuela. If he does so, it's because some people are getting through to him. Maybe the memo that Graham and I and our principal drafter, Fulton Armstrong, an expert on Latin America, a national intelligence officer for Latin America back in the day, maybe that memo has been seen by people who have some way, maybe it's Melania, to get through to Trump. Now,
Okay. All
if
right.
it's Melania, then we'll take it, you know? So
All
anyhow,
right.
he may stop. And if he stops, it's because he got better advice from the Schultzes, from the vice president. Well, I don't know. Well, anyway, and back in the day, you had this real conflict. And I was just privileged to have this.
Yeah.
See that, yeah.
Well, I just don't see much common sense out there. That's all today. I'm not sure there ever was a lot, but maybe it was slightly better back in the day. And you were
Yeah.
privileged to see it.
Graham, I think you brought out a very important point when it comes to the official policies of Washington, because we know with the Biden administration, we had Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan. Every time they talk, we knew the official policy of the United States, what they want to achieve, and what is the main objective in Ukraine, for example. But you don't see that in the Trump administration, because as Ray just mentioned, the Secretary of State and the national, those two positions are occupied by the same person. National Security Advisor and the Secretary of State are the same, Marco Rubio. He doesn't talk that much. We don't know what is going on with Marco Rubio. Even in Venezuela, he's not talking that much about that. But we have, Tulsi Gabbard. Recently, she was talking about going against the regime change. She clearly said that regime change is not going to benefit the United States.
Yes. I go ahead.
And I see not only Tulsi Gabbard, I see the vice president as well. He has a better understanding, a more realistic understanding of what's going on in the West Asia and in Ukraine. And I don't know how, I'm talking about J.D. Vance being reasonable, at least to talk about. But these people are not that much considered with the Trump administration. These people are, Tulsi Gabbard is somehow isolated. Even with
the fact that she's there at all, I think is impressive. People were trying to block her and stop her. They threw her out of the Democratic Party, as a matter of fact, because of her policies. But Nima, before I'm not gonna weep for the loss of Blinken and Sullivan. Maybe you aren't either. But I mean, let me remember. I'm sure you remember that so-called Blinken, who had all the correct, he could speak salon French and all this, and know which teacup and spoon to use and all that kind of thing. But he went off to Alaska to meet with Wang Yi. This was, I don't know, 2 years ago. and I forget what the meeting was supposed to be about, but Blinken came in and said, "All right, now let me tell you what our position is and what we expect you to do." And he mentioned a few things. And if you remember, Wang Yi pushed his chair back, stood up, and said, "Mr. Blinken, China will not accept to be addressed in that fashion. That is unacceptable. Who do you think you are, in effect?" And they closed the meeting and walked out. So I don't think there's been much kind of what the Germans Fingerspitzengefühl, the kind of fingertip feel for the. I may surprise you in one way. I am not big on Zionism, as I'm sure is no surprise to you. But I was also, I maybe mentioned this before. I was kind of appalled when Trump appointed this guy, uh, the real estate guy. Name is on the tip of my tongue.
Steve Witkoff.
Steve Witkoff, yeah. I thought, oh my God, a New York Jewish Zionist businessman is going to go off and talk to Putin. Basically, I've been fairly impressed with him in the sense that I think Witkoff, as a businessman or whatever else, financier, understands the nature of diplomacy, if you will, or transaction, listening. And he gave a very interesting interview to Tucker Carlson about some months ago and talked about how he thinks about addressing Putin or talking to Hamas or talking to Bibi or whoever else. And he said, basically, I like to go in, I like to get to know who they are, if they have kids, to chat them up a little bit, ask them what they want, what they're interested in, before simply saying, "Look, the president wants you to do this." I thought, my God, this guy Witkoff sounds like he's been to CIA spy school. I mean, this is what they teach you. I mean, you don't walk in and tell people what to do. You try to win their confidence, understand them better. And I thought Witkoff probably, I mean, the fact that he's met 4 or 5 times with Putin and Bibi, and I think even in I don't know, he's been meeting with among the Iranians, but I think that's a sign that these people instinctively feel that this guy knows how to address other people and their concerns. He may not agree, and I don't know what he tells Trump when he goes back home, but I've got 1,000% more confidence in Witkoff and his manner of approach to people and foreign countries and foreign interests than I'd ever do in the perfectly salon polite courtesies of a Yale-educated Blinken.
Now you're Harvard educated, so I can see
Same thing for Harvard. All bullshit.
Hey, let me say a word about. I mean, I think the Russians feel the same way you do about Witkoff. Why else would he meet 5 or 6 or 7 times with Putin? As a matter of fact, here's a really bizarre thing. Trump changes his mind about a new summit in Budapest, imposes more sanctions on Russia, and the same day, Putin sends Kirill Dmitriev, his finance, investment, economic guy, to meet with Witkoff in Florida. And he spends 3 days there on the TV and everything else. We're just about there on Ukraine, and we got great investment opportunities. And what about that tunnel there for the railroad under the Bering Straits? And so there's this real dichotomy of people like Witkoff and Dmitriev, which is established channel now, as opposed to Rubio and Lavrov. Lavrov has to be quintessentially polite, but you can see what he thinks about Rubio. And the last thing I'll say is, the last time we had a Secretary of State who was also the assistant to the President for National Security Affairs, okay, so-called National Security Advisor, was Henry Kissinger, okay? Now, comparisons can be invidious, but you compare Kissinger for whatever else he did in terms of intellectual acumen and the willingness to deal with Rubio. Well, and worse than that, that's the bottleneck. As you know, Graham, when when the CIA sent stuff up to the president, the bottleneck was the National Security Advisor. Kissinger used to take our president's daily brief, rip it up, and say, "This is hogwash, Mr. President. Yeah, this is good." And so that's the bottleneck. Now, what is Rubio bottlenecking? Maybe he's bottlenecking things like sensible analyses of Venezuela, what to do and what not to do. So you've got Rubio in a very, very interesting and very influential position because he can prevent anything from getting to the president, including stuff for the military. Military doesn't usually challenge the national security advisor.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah. So that's the fly in the ointment as far as Rubio is concerned. And we all know what Rubio wants to do to Venezuela, right? Right.
Yeah. Actually, if I could pose a question, are we sort of transitioning to
Go ahead, Graham.
Venezuela? No, I just wanted to say, when I really don't understand what's going on, I really start to worry, because that makes me think all the suppositions and foundations of my belief about how the world works and how countries work maybe isn't correct anymore. So I was a bit startled when it came to the emergence of this Venezuela situation. Okay, I'm prejudiced. I've worked most of my life as a CIA officer in the Middle East, dealt with Russians and in Afghanistan and China and all these places. But on my geopolitical map, South America, Latin America barely existed. I mean, that was just my professional weakness. I never went there. It wasn't where I was supposed to be working. But suddenly, out of the blue, it seemed to me, suddenly we're all talking about what is essentially the old Monroe Doctrine, that we're bringing our troops, or we're bringing everybody home. Latin America is now where it's at. It's where we're going to defend. This is our last redoubt, sort of defense against the rest of the world. And it almost looks like we've turned to our role in Latin America as the primary interest, which it has never essentially been, other than to rape and to pillage at will over a long period of time. So do you, and I haven't seen any writing of saying, guess what, boys, new doctrine, new strategy, we're all coming home. We're coming back to the Western Hemisphere. We're going to defend the Western Hemisphere. Remember the Monroe Doctrine, no foreigners in the Western Hemisphere. I don't seem to have read any serious doctrine, new policy that suggests that, my God, Latin America, Central America is the most important thing right now. Abandoning almost everything else in the world. Have you seen any inkling of this? That this is a brand new take on America's role in the world?
Go ahead, Ray.
And Nima, you also must see some of this in Brazil.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ray. You go with yours.
I'm going to offer some speculation. I would compare it to the situation when Ronald Reagan had 241 Marines killed in the Marine barracks in Beirut in 1983.
Yeah, I was there.
Wow. You were in Beirut. Wow. Okay, so you know what an earth-shattering experience that was. And you know also that Reagan asked his folks, what the hell are 241 Marines doing in a damn barracks that could be bombed? And the answers came back pretty lame. And so he says, all right, get them out of there. Get them out of there. And so they brought them out onto ships, and then a couple of months they put them home, okay? Now, big defeat. What did the Reagan administration do? Oh, my God. We have to do something powerful. We have to show how strong we are. I got an idea. Those rulers in the little island of Grenada are threatening our medical students. They might take them hostage. Let's invade Grenada. So the 82nd Airborne goes into Grenada, and we have a big success rescuing these Now, I was there. I was briefing at the time. The Grenadian officials had already said, "Uncle, uncle, we'll send it back on the next ship." No, no, no. We had to have our win to show how powerful. Now, my analogy may be way off base, but not only are the Russians winning in Ukraine, but I suggest even more important, they've lost in the Far East. Okay, when there was that big parade, that big assembly in Beijing in the early September, it showed that most of the people in the world are ruled by these people and they don't want to live under US diktat. And the Chinese are really powerful, and it's a fool's errand to try to build your navy and fight against the Chinese. And so they got together in Washington. What are we going to do about this? This is awful. And they said, well, let's turn our attention. Yeah, that's what we do. We turn our attention to our hemisphere where we can do what we want, and also to our internal affairs where we have to use the military to suppress the people. And
Yeah.
actually, there was a report that Eldridge Colby, the big China hawk, wrote an addendum to the defense guidance, which said, "Yeah, we're gonna turn our attention to." Now, we never saw much proof of that, but I think that report was probably true. So that's my long-winded. Sorry about that. Long-winded explanation of Trump felt he had to do something, and this is Venezuela. We can handle that, which they can't. And he's got no good advice from Hegseth or from Rubio, both of which would like to show how strong we are. And the inevitable conclusion will be we'll have another Vietnam in Venezuela.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
That's the fear here, Graham. Here in Brazil, people, even the government, they feel, is the United States going to bring the chaos here in the Latin America, and who's going to be
exactly.
influenced by that chaos? Nobody knows if that operation would be successful in changing the regime in Venezuela, but the consequences of that operation would influence each and every country here in Latin America. And nobody's happy with the policies in Washington here in Latin America, unless maybe Argentina is happy about it because they have received $40 billion. You know, Donald Trump just bought the election in Argentina by, but how, even there is no good communications with between Brazilian government and the government in the United States.
I
That's
know.
unbelievably tragic.
Well, I think if we go back a little bit in history here, there's one word, one country that I think we should not forget that's never mentioned in this context anymore because it happened 20 years ago and nobody remembers anything that happened 20 years ago. Cuba. The United States has been obsessed, there's no better word, obsessed with communism in Latin America, obsessed with Cuba, and these incredible magical characters like Che Guevara riding, his motorcycle from all the way from Chile to Panama, raising the flag of anti-imperialism. And then we got the Bay of Pigs, the Bay of Pigs, which is a big setback for America in its attempt to overthrow Cuba. And to this day, I think we link Castro, who was a huge, bigger than life character, still is as an image. And then Che Guevara, bigger than life character. And then we go to Hugo Chavez, who I think still many see coming out of that anti-imperial tradition, and in a very much weaker way, less intellectual way, even the present president in Venezuela. So I think the ghosts, the specters of communism, of popular uprising, and Che was a master at this. I mean, he had virtually all of Latin America stirred up and movements going and that kind of thing. And maybe I think there's still some fear of Cuba-like events in Latin America that America does not remember happily.
And Ray, when it comes to this, to sending more troops to Syria, and some people arguing that could cause some sort of problem in the near future if the war between Iran and Israel, happens again. And because the United States getting back to Syria, in my opinion, would somehow give some sort of support to Israeli attack on Iran if they decide to go in that direction. That is of concern. And how do you find, because Donald Trump is putting the United States in a trap. You've mentioned Venezuela being some sort of, Vietnam, but I think the same thing could happen in the West Asia between Iran and Israel if Israel finally succeeds in bringing the United States into the conflict with Iran.
Yes, well, Nima, you know that I've been sort of an outlier, thinking that the war, another attack by Israel on Iran is unlikely. I think it would be suicidal. But let's say they did do that. Now, those troops in northern Syria are pawns. Our Defense Department is quite willing to have them be targets, okay, in hopes that they will be a deterrent for what the Iranians might do. Well, they could be a deterrent to what Iran might do, but as Graham will know, there are all kinds of real terrorist groups out there that can do a lot of those several hundred troops in, okay? So it's sort of like a tripwire, but it can cut both ways. I just don't know about Syria. It just kind of confuses me, but with Giuliani in the White House yesterday and all that kind of stuff, it's in flux in my view. The Caribbean and Venezuela is a much greater concern to me. And I mentioned the analogy with Vietnam. And let me just take advantage of this moment here to advertise a book that's just out today by award-winning James Bradley, who wrote Flags of Our Fathers. It's called Precious Freedom, and it's unique because it's based on his living in Vietnam for 10 full years, interviewing all manner of people there and finding out why it was not that the U.S. lost, but that the Vietnamese won. It's a heartfelt thing. It talks about emotions and how Uncle Ho guided the Vietnamese and how U.S. intelligence really messed up royally. And Graham will remember that as well as I. So it's really quite a book. It's out today. And I did an interview with the author last night. That will be on my website right quick, probably just in an hour from now.
Yeah. Graham, there is an article in New York Times. It was published yesterday that it says that the war between Iran and Israel is inevitable and is unavoidable because of what has happened. The United States is increasing the sanctions on Iran, and the nuclear negotiations have reached a dead end. That's why the possibility of having a direct war between Iran and Israel is going up. And do you think that with what has happened so far between Iran and Israel, and we know as time goes by, we know the reality of what has happened in Israel, what has happened in Iran. What's your understanding on the position of the Trump administration on that?
Well, first of all, Bibi calls the shots. I don't know how much influence Trump has. He must have some, because obviously American support, at least defensive support, is vital. On the other hand, I'm afraid I would have to line up with the more pessimistic interpretations, mainly looking at the longer range trends. I mean, here we have Iran, perhaps the most important, biggest state in the Middle East, and its near nuclear capabilities, its hostility to Zionism. That's not forever, but I think it's quite durable for quite a while. We know about Israel's ambitions for a greater Israel. Bibi has himself advertised that, in which not only Syria, but Jordan and Lebanon and parts of Saudi Arabia and, God knows, parts of Egypt could all get drawn into this greater Israel. So I think the issues at stake are very powerful, and I cannot imagine Israel truly giving up these ambitions. Now, they may decide, well, for now it's too dangerous, or Bibi's home position is not very good. But basically, I think Israelis feel that this is a war that has to come, that will come. It's a showdown, if you will, between powers that has to come. And I think that, to me, that makes a great deal of sense. You can back off, you can back away for a year maybe or two, who knows? But I think ultimately these two powers are destined to clash because it's Israel that is determined to dominate entirely the Middle East, and that is not part of Iran's willingness to be part of that. So I don't think it looks good. Maybe we can stave it off for a while. And you're right, Nima, that Israel, I guess, suffered much more from that 10-day, 12-day war than they wanted to admit. But it's coming out that they did suffer a lot. And supposedly it was Israel that asked for the ceasefire, not Iran. But I just am afraid that it's in the cards. It's something that has to happen, destined to happen, sadly. The determination of who is really going to be the major power in the Middle East.
Yeah. And Ray, the other thing that is happening within the MAGA movement is this sort of attack on Tucker Carlson. They want to cancel him because of his position when it comes to the West Asia, when it comes to Venezuela. These people are against war. Even Thomas Massey, he was, Miriam Adelson was giving more than $20 million to go against him to remove him from power, from his position.
Really?
Yeah, 20 million. Unbelievable how these people trying to change the foreign policy of the United States. But Ray, how do you see the fracture? What's going on within the MAGA movement? These people who are against the endless wars, against the genocide in Gaza, and those people who are trying to still keep their position, keep their power to influence the public opinion. We had the Charlie Kirk, we had Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and it doesn't seem that the situation is getting better, even by buying, TikTok. The Zionists are buying TikTok and all. Your take on what's going on?
And they bought CBS.
CBS, exactly, yeah.
Well, Nima, you're quite right in the way you describe things. I'm not a specialist in domestic policy here, so I'm going to punt on this one. I think you've described something very serious. And I just add that I remember back in 2001 when Netanyahu was in the living room of real supporters there, and the video camera was, he was bragging about this and that. And he said, turn that video camera off. And he didn't. And so we see Netanyahu, it's on YouTube. He's saying, the Americans, they can always be moved in the right direction. You know what percent of the Americans support us no matter what we do? 80%. That's absurd. Netanyahu's word. Absurd. Okay. Well, it ain't that way anymore. Okay. I don't know if it's 50%. So there's a sea change there. But how it all falls out in domestic politics, Graham has a better sense than I do because he's worked more in the Middle East and knows about the power of Israel. Perhaps he can shed a lot more light on it than I can.
Well, Ray, I mean, you and I both watch the same TV shows. I mean, when you've got a guy like Tucker Carlson, what does he have? 20 million followers or something like that, giving long, very harsh analyses and discussions of what does Israel contribute to the United States at all? He says, and John Mearsheimer, okay, he's a scholar and academic, but he says Israel is not a plus for the United States. It's a stone around our neck. dragging us down against our interests. I mean, we see this all over the place every day. The Charlie Kirk business, younger generation. When I ask my daughter about my grandkids and their views, she says they're all extraordinarily anti-Israeli. So I mean, this is not my generation at all. But I think, as you say, Ray, it's a sea change, and I think it's happening faster and faster. I think the Israel is very, very worried, but it's hard to talk people away from money. And as long as AIPAC is able to hand out, millions of dollars during a campaign, and Marco, you saw the other day, Marco Rubio, somebody showed the a quote. I had not heard it. Maybe you had. Marco Rubio said the only reason he went in to ran for office was that his main major wish was to serve Israeli interests. He said it on camera.
Yeah, I think the outcome of the mayoral election in New York has
Yes.
somehow it's hitting, because the only candidate that said in the aftermath of the being elected, they were asked, "Where are you going to go?" All of them said, "We are going to go to Israel." And Zohar Mamdani said, "I'm going to stay in New York because I'm the mayor of New York. I'm going to be the mayor of New York. I'm going to serve you." And you know what's fascinating? More than 75% of the people, young people under the age of 30, they voted for him,
Including Jews.
including Jews. Exactly. And it's amazing what has happened. And I think that shows how the public opinion is changing in the United States and how sensitive it gets when it comes to Israel. But go ahead, Ray.
No, just add a little note here. The funniest thing I saw was the governor of Texas saying, any New Yorkers who try to escape New York and come to Texas, we're going to arrest them. Talk about division in our country. Well, anyhow, I just thought I'd throw that in for merriment.
No, I
Thank
think it's exciting times with all the changes in the wind. I don't know. I think this is going to be very serious. The Mamdani business is just one part of it, but I think times are changing fast, and we will see. But really exciting times.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, Ray and Graham, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
My pleasure, Nima. Good discussion.
Thanks.